Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank y'all for coming. I hope that you're not here by default, but I understand completely if you are. I just want to be sure that we're managing some expectations. So today what we're going to talk about is incorporating some different facilitation techniques into the classroom. And some things that you're going to notice as we go through this is that a lot of these are just going to be good educational strategies, right? Because facilitation is teaching, teaching is facilitation. But what I want to do today is kind of point out some things that I used in my classroom that I gleaned from some of my experiences through FFA that I felt made my classroom much more effective. And so that's what we'll go through as we proceed. So first of all, a little bit about me. My name is Ryan Best. I'm from Elida, New Mexico. It's a little bitty small town in eastern New Mexico, a ranching community. Grew up on a cow-calf operation there. My family operated about 35,000 acres. That sounds like a lot, but considering that we can run the same number of cows on 35,000 acres as you can about 400 acres up here, it's really not that much. But nonetheless, agriculture shaped who I am. I was very active in FFA in high school. Was fortunate to serve as state FFA president for New Mexico in 2009, 2010. And then was also fortunate to be selected as national FFA president 2011, 2012. I started my undergraduate degree at New Mexico State University. I was there for 5 semesters. Took my year off school to serve as a national officer and then finished my undergraduate degree at Tarleton State University in Stephenville, Texas. I student taught in Stephenville, graduated, went out to West Texas and taught at Seminole for a year, and then went back to Stephenville for the past 6 years. And I'm now 1 year removed from being in the classroom as I'm here working on a master's and a PhD. During that time, fortunate to work with some excellent kids, really, really hardworking kids. We had a lot of success. We were really fortunate. But one of the things that we always emphasized in our program was it all started with our classroom. And I think that we all agree that the classroom lays that foundation for everything we do in Ag Ed. So whenever Emily talked to me about doing a workshop over some things, over like a topic of my own interest, I felt like there were some things that I learned through my training in FFA that went alongside the things that I was taught in college and have been honed a little bit through my experiences in the classroom. And I want to share those with you today. So first of all, to get started, with your table or your partner, whoever's close to you, I'd like for you to take a second and think about the very best classroom that you have ever been a part of, okay? This could be an elementary school, junior high, high school, any classroom that you've ever been a part of. What is the very best one that you've ever had? And some specific things. What made it outstanding? What was the culture like? What activities did you take part in? What routines were in place? And what did you learn from that classroom? Okay, so let's just take a second and talk about that. We will do the duration of one song. Whenever that ends, we'll come back and we'll share a few of those out loud. Questions? Okay. I'll share with you if you don't have it.
You're good. I was kind of listening.
Okay.
I don't know. I think it goes a long way to have rules in the classroom, but also not having a lot of rules to give them the freedom to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
Nice for students. I feel like my students, at least, I'm in a suburban area, so the less rules that I have, just to give them like, hey, this is what we're doing today, and then the rest of the time to do it, give them a little more freedom. I think they like that a little bit better.
That's awesome. I think the best one that I've ever been a part of, my 7th and 8th grade teacher, because I was in a really small school, so I had the same teacher for both years. She created this culture within our classroom where she was hard, the hardest teacher I've ever had in my life, but I loved her. And she created this culture where you knew what the expectations were. We had routines, very well established, and she rewarded success. So like she did like fun things you got to earn like little coins, and they were just washers that she had painted, and then you could go buy a homework pass with the washer and like those kinds of things. So whenever I think of like an outstanding classroom, like that was the one that always came to mind for me. Not always the most easy thing to do in an ag class, right? Because we manage so many things, you can't really do all that. But still, there were some really good things that she did that I enjoyed. So.
I feel like it's hard using ag and trying to keep a routine. I know it's possible, but with so many things, so many different seasons, like show season and contest season, so you fall into a routine in the fall, and then in the spring you're like, yeah, we'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
We'll do it the next day.
Oh yeah, because you turn around and you've got stock shows and judging and speaking contests and everything, and it's hard to manage all of it. So.
And then your classroom hasn't seen you for like a week, and they're like, oh, you're still alive.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like I only taught school 4 days in February because we had 4 stock shows back to back to back, and my kids hated it, but I didn't know what else to do. So perfect. Well, thank you for sharing. Okay, about 30 more seconds. We'll wrap that up in about 30 seconds. All right. So hopefully we had some good conversations surrounding outstanding classrooms that we were part of. What group would like to share about one of their experiences of an outstanding classroom?
One thing that we talked about is we really enjoyed the last day and a half, so to say, as far as seeing the different ag teachers and different presenters, and just your style and your enthusiasm and the differences, and we're ag teachers. I mean, it's just like, I get goosebumps thinking about it and seeing you guys. So that's kind of what Jordan and I talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in Texas, our VATAT conference, we do the same PD. I loved it because I got to see the strengths of different teachers and kind of combine it all together. Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Thank you for sharing. You were going to talk, right?
I had an English teacher when I was a senior in high school. Her room was like one of those rooms that you walked in and it felt inviting. She had like a Scentsy and like lamps instead of her classroom lights on. And every Friday, those were our days as students to do scholarship applications, job applications. And that wasn't a part of her job description, but she would sit down and if you asked her for a letter of recommendation right there in class, would write one out for you and you'd have it in hand by the end of the hour. And that was phenomenal.
Yeah, that's incredible. It sounds like an outstanding classroom culture that she created. Do any of us have that type of environment in our ag classroom, where we have couches and that kind of stuff in there? Okay. Yeah, I'm going to be honest, you know what, that works. The English teacher in my high school, she had couches everywhere, and that's what we sat on for class, which is fine. I don't like that. I think it creates some laziness in my kids. So we had one in our office, and it became the hangout place in our office. Hated it, so we burned that sucker. It needed to have been burned. I think it'd been around for 40 years. It was terrible, but still a great classroom culture, an inviting place. Yeah, absolutely, and expectations. And she met those expectations, which is really good. Let's have one more example.
I had a college chemistry teacher. Every time, big, huge class, right? And they'd have, probably, yeah. So she always had music playing when you come in and doing bell work, or we would call bell work. And so there'd always be some sort of music going on. And so you knew when you first come in, it'd be getting your stuff together, getting whatever materials or handouts. And then by the time the music was over, it was time for class to get started.
Yeah.
And there was kind of an expectation built in to the class.
Yeah, so it got you off to a good start. You knew what to expect. You knew how to fall right into a routine. And again, it kind of comes back to that classroom culture piece. And I think that for me, facilitation is wrapped so much into that classroom culture piece. And like we were discussing, I had a 7th and 8th grade teacher. Let me preface, where I graduated from was tiny. I only had 10 kids in my graduating class. Okay, we were small, really, really small. And so I had the same teacher. Well, I had the same elementary teacher 4 years. She just kept moving up with us. But I love Miss Creighton. She was one of the best people I've ever known. But my 7th and 8th grade teacher was a lady named Miss Powell. And Miss Powell created that classroom culture that you guys are talking about. She was the hardest teacher that I've ever had. It's the first 0 I've ever taken in my life. Because she had this policy that if your butt was not in the chair whenever the bell rang, then you were tardy, and you were not allowed to leave her classroom unless you had a bathroom or a hall pass. And so even if you had the homework done and it was sitting in your locker, if it was not in the desk or in your backpack ready for us to grade, you got a 0 for that sucker unless you had a late homework pass or a hall pass to go get it. So I mean, like, she was hard, but she created this culture where she rewarded us with like little coins that we could get. We get them for AR points and like all that kind of stuff. We go buy homework passes, all that good stuff. So, but the thing that I remember about her is just how inviting she was, how much she made us feel a part of it, and we felt empowered to take our own learning into our own hands. And I think that's huge. And as I think back and I listen to y'all describe some of your outstanding classrooms, like, there's some key things there that I'm going to point out today that I think make that possible. And so I use the term facilitation loosely, right? Because it's not just facilitating a workshop and being this energetic person that's up here to entertain you. It's how do we get students from point A to point B the quickest, most efficiently possible? And how do we create a culture where they want to come back to our classroom? I always had a goal that I wanted my class to be the one that my kids went home and talked about every day after school. Because I knew if I did that, I had buy-in from the kids, I had buy-in from their parents, and as long as I had those two things, I had buy-in from the school, right? So that was my goal. Now, with that being said, I hate arts and crafts. I hate arts and crafts. And I have a materials bucket, and every cluster, I sat my kids in clusters, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. Every cluster had a materials bucket, a supplies bucket that had all that stuff in it, so that it was there, ready to go. I hate how much of a mess it is. I hate gluing, I hate taping, I hate foldables, I hate it all, okay? Do not do arts and crafts for me in my classroom. If you do, more power to you. I think that's awesome. Not for me. So I want to be very clear that facilitation for me is not arts and crafts. We're not going to do foldables. We're not going to have like popsicle sticks and glitter, okay? So I'm just going to take you through a few of these things that I felt helped me. Now, I might have been a little ambitious in what I put into this. If I don't get to all of it, I'm happy to share this with you. But we're going to go through it kind of quickly if we can. So what to expect? Some things that we're going to talk about is our classroom culture, the experiential learning model, cooperative learning, and some tips and tricks. Okay, and so again, you could teach an entire class on experiential learning, and you could teach an entire class on cooperative learning, and we're going to try to put it in a really small amount. So I've gleaned the things that I felt made my classroom more effective. So first, let's talk about classroom culture. So the very, very, very first thing that I did with my kids every year is we created a social contract. Okay, and this eliminated 95% of all discipline problems I ever had in my classroom. Okay, so my social contract was literally a flip chart. And at the beginning of every class, I put 4 questions on the board. And I'm sorry that that's a little bit small, but again, I'll share this PowerPoint with you if you'd like me to. But the 4 questions were, how do you want to be treated by me, the teacher? How do you want to be treated by each other? How do you think I, the teacher, want to be treated by you? And how do you want to treat each other when there is conflict? Okay, so I had those 4 questions on the board. Those kids worked in groups. They wrote down everything that they wanted to do, and then we came up. And I had a scribe who wrote all of these things on the board. And they they were just little quick things. Like, I want to be treated with respect. I wanted to be treated fairly. Okay. How do you want to be treated by each other? I don't want you to cut me off when I'm talking. Like, just stuff like that, right? So just really quick bulleted stuff. We wrote it all down. And then at the end of it, we put it onto a flip chart, and every kid came up and signed the social contract. And then that social contract hung at the front of my classroom every day. And I had one for each class period, okay? And it hung up there. And anytime I had a student that was misbehaving or was causing problems or whatever, all I had to do was say, hey, Lawson, like, what does this say right here on our social contract? Well, it says to be respectful. Are you being respectful? No. All right, awesome. Well, let's hold ourselves to that standard, right? So it created, they built it. They built the social contract. It wasn't just a set of rules that I dictated to them. They built it. And it was huge in changing the culture in my classroom. So that's the first thing that I did every single year, social contract. And then throughout the year, if I had a student move in, the first thing they did was get with a partner, they explained what the social contract was, and then they signed the social contract, okay? So bar none, that changed my teaching experience. So this was huge. And where I got this, I did a version of this before, but where I got this was from we went through a presentation called Capturing Kids' Hearts. Our entire school did that, and it was excellent. If you ever get a chance to do this, you absolutely need to. Some people criticize it as being pretty touchy-feely. It is a little bit touchy-feely. Take the things that you like from it and use them, leave the other things there, right? But you can do that. And I've got other resources here that you're welcome to come look through, take pictures of, whatever you'd like to do. So that's the first thing on classroom culture. Is there any questions on that social contract? Okay, so that was huge. It made such a difference. The number one thing that you need to have up here, and they're going to say it on all of these questions, is respect, right? As long as you have that word respect on there, it is your catch-all. It covers everything that you do in your classroom. Nothing y'all didn't know already. But again, I'm just going through things that I felt make my classroom a little bit better. Second thing is good things. And I meant to start with this, and I'm sorry I didn't. But good things is like huge to me for developing relationships with my kids. So what we do is we take the first 2 minutes of class and I ask, what good things happened? Okay? What good things are going on in your life? And you're going to, you know those kids that always talk, they're going to say something, they're always going to have an answer. But what we did is we created a set of rules that this week, this section, I'm going to get 3 answers from this section. I'm going to get 3 answers from this section, so on and so forth. Or I'm going to tell them, hey, Lawson, tomorrow, I'm sorry, I'm using you because you're about the only person I know. I'm going to say, hey, tomorrow, be ready to share a good thing with me. Front load that for them so that they have a little better opportunity. Choose different kids to share. I did this daily because my kids enjoyed it and they look forward to it. You don't have to do this daily. Even if you want to just make it a Monday thing and talk about the good things that happened over the weekend, that's great. Some words of caution for good things. Some kids are going to share stuff that are not good, right? Like, for whatever reason, you're going to say, hey, what good happened in your life? And they're going to say, my parents got divorced. That's not a good thing. But for whatever reason, kids say that stuff, So we have to have an appropriate response to that of, man, I'm really sorry to hear that. If you need to talk to anyone, feel free to reach out, or we can get you in touch with a counselor. And then immediately follow with one of those kids that you know is going to have something to say to bring the mood back up. Okay, so just some words of caution for that good things thing. This also changed my teaching because I got to know my kids. And I got to know more than just my FFAers. I got to know like the kids that are only in ag because they have to be in ag, right? And I got to know like important things about their life so that as they're walking down the hall, I can like say, hey, how's your dirt bike racing going? I had a kid who loved dirt bike racing. He talked about it all the time. Hey, how'd that go? Or how'd you do in your fishing tournament last week or whatever, right? Just things that we do normally. This just gives us a little bit more formal opportunity to learn what those things are. So, yes?
I just have to say, I'm thankful for this speaking to me because what is it that people say about kids? They're so entitled. Society says kids are so entitled. I guess I don't understand what entitled is because to me, I see it as they're so ungrateful. Mm-hmm. And so that's something I want to focus is try to teach them. I want to watch and see through the course of the year. If we do this, do they talk about shallow things? Do we find deeper things in life to be grateful for? Because I'm going to have to focus on my kids are so ungrateful. Yeah. So ungrateful. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe this will help.
Yeah. This was huge for me. I thought it changed my teaching as well. And it gained more kids from my program, right? Because all of a sudden I take an interest in somebody who is not necessarily a diehard ag kid. And then next thing I know, they're on my meets judging team and they're rocking it, right? I mean, they're scoring a 740 at their third contest. And it's like, what the heck? Like, how did this happen? So just just like things like that, that I felt really helped in terms of creating that classroom culture. Thank you for that comment. The next thing is context, state, result. And this is something that you've probably heard in your education courses, but for me, this is something to keep in mind, okay? So context is going to be where our students are or where we are as a class. It tells our kids where they're going in light of where we're at right now and where we've been. Okay, so that's basically what that means. So context is everything. It's going to be everything from the music that plays whenever they walk in the room, to your mood, to the mood of the other kids. Okay, all of these things are clues that are developing context. And so what I've been told is that it allows us to read our class. And read is the acronym right here. So it is relevance, expectations, acknowledgement, and direction. And all of these things contribute to the context of our classroom. And so we want to make sure our content's relevant. We want to make sure that the things we're doing are relevant. We want to have clear expectations. This is what we're doing, and this is how you're expected to behave. We're going to acknowledge whenever somebody does something really well. And that's a piece that gets overlooked. It's easy to just pat those good kids on the back because they're the good kids, right? But let's acknowledge every student whenever they do something well. Now, I'm not saying we acknowledge them for mediocre work, but we can find something good that every kid does. And then finally is directions. And directions are huge, right? That's how we move from one activity to the next. And we're going to talk a little bit more about directions in just a second. But how are we being clear? How are we being concise? What's the language we're using to make sure that they are doing what we ask them to do and not something they interpret, which kids are really good at interpreting, right? So those are all good things to keep in mind. And the thing to remember is that your context plus your state, a combination of context and state, is what gives you a result. Okay? So I couldn't find the right graphic, and I should have just made it a math formula. But it's context plus state equals your result. So state is, what state is the student in? Are they thinking, are they feeling, and are they doing? Okay? And a key thing that people miss on this is that when you change one of those states, you're actually changing all three of those states. Okay? So if we ask students to think about something, more than likely we're changing their feeling. Either they're mad that they're having to think about it, or they're happy they're having to think about it, or they're indifferent they're having to think about whatever it is, but we're affecting their feeling. And then we're also affecting what they're doing, because if we're asking them to think, we might be asking them to write it down. We might be asking them to just sit and reflect. So when we change one of those, we change all three of those. And so we want to keep that in mind. The other thing about state is we need our state to match the activity that we have the kids going. Okay? So if I asked you to share the deepest, most meaningful thing that has ever happened in your entire life, and I have clown music and we're skipping around the room doing it, does our state match the activity? No, it absolutely does not. On the other side of that, if I'm playing like super solemn music and I tell kids they can't laugh, smile, or react, but then I tell you all to make a joke, that's a little bit odd. I don't know where the switch is.
I think it's
Well, that's interesting. Maybe it's this one over here. I guess it wanted to change its state, but they. So we have to keep that in mind. Our state has to match our activity that we have going on. And then finally, the result is the end in mind. We need to be very clear in establishing what it is that we're wanting those students to achieve, right? So we work backwards in all of our curriculum. We have a template for our lesson plans, everything else. But these results can be really well thought out, and they establish what the context and the state's going to be. So again, that adds to our classroom culture. Okay, next one, we're going to talk about direction sets. Okay, so direction sets are, I'm not talking about like your instructions for a big project or anything like that, but I'm talking about like your everyday little things that you do. They need to be clear, concise, and simple, easy to follow. And the other thing that I've found is if I am similar in the way I deliver directions every time, there's very little confusion typically that takes place. So the pattern that I've come up with, and I'm not saying we do this every time because it will get old, but the pattern that I feel works for me is I have a go word, I deliver 3 action verbs, okay? I give them a time constraint, I ask them if they have any questions, and then I give the go word. So what that would look like is on go, or whatever word you want to use, on go, grab a paper, pen, and head to the corner. We have 15 seconds. Questions? Go. Okay? That's quick, that's concise, it was clear. You knew exactly what it was that I was asking you to do. Very, very quick things. Okay? Now, would I typically do this if I was wanting to get a piece of paper and a pencil and go to the corner? Probably not. That's a little bit juvenile, but like it does work and it's very clear. You just have to be able to utilize it. And I found that if I returned to that pattern every time, my kids learned to expect the go word. They didn't just jump up and start moving while I was still talking, you know. So that was, again, a piece of that facilitation training that I felt really made a big difference for me. Any questions on direction sets? Okay, if y'all have questions at any point, like I said, I think I got a little ambitious, so I'm trying to go through this a little quick. Please stop me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Okay, so experiential learning model. I can hear the eye rolls from here, right? This has been beat into our heads. God bless Mr. Kolb or Dr. Kolb, but man, I got tired of seeing this, right? But it is so important. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time reviewing it. Just remember that we have our experience, and then we have an observation about our experience. We have some sort of aha moment, right? So that's our abstract conceptualization. And then we have active experimentation where we apply that, okay? So it's really important to keep all that in mind whenever we are considering facilitation, because facilitation so many times is an experience that we are trying to glean some sort of point or meaning from, right? It also is backed up by constructivism, which is how y'all were taught to teach, right? So it all is intertwined. It's all wrapped up. So I just wanted to revisit this model because we're going to come back to it in just a second and help us out in terms of processing. So experiential learning, I thought that this was incredible. We're creating an experience for the kids, okay? And I was listening to a podcast the other day about a man who he created this incredible experience for his son, beginning when he was 13, ending when he was 19, and it was basically kind of a journey affirming him as a man, right? Like some sort of rite of passage. But he said something in there that I thought was so important is, he said, with 15% more effort, you can make any experience meaningful. Just with 15% more effort, you make it all meaningful. So if a kid who is struggling in your class finally gets it or makes a good grade or whatever, just taking that long to walk up to them and just encourage and affirm them that, hey, congratulations, this is incredible. This is awesome that you were able to achieve this. We took something as simple and mundane as handing back papers, and we made that a meaningful experience for that student. Okay, so I thought that was just a really good piece that I took away from that. And so then it begs the question, but how do we bring meaning to an experience? And whenever I'm talking about that, I'm referring to what do we as facilitators or we as teachers do to create meaning for that particular activity that the student just went through? And the answer to that is we have to have effective processing. Okay, so the way that we process our questions, the way we ask questions, and the way we arrive at a point is the way we bring meaning. So when we discuss processing and experience, there's 3 questions that we ask. These 3 questions are pretty simple. They're the what, so what, now what? And we've probably heard that, right? We've probably seen these 3 questions as we've gone through our educational training. But it's worth revisiting because I'm going to lay this over the top of our experiential learning model in just a second so that you can see it in real time. Okay, so what? These are going to be general questions about the experience. So you just created this activity for students to do. They complete it, and we're trying to bring the class back in, ask questions to gain meaning from it. So we start with, what happened? How'd it go? Okay, what did you guys notice? Okay, those types of very general questions. And if it's a high energy activity, you might start getting some crazy answers, right? You might get kids that are just off the wall, like, oh, well, she pulled my hair, or they did this, or whatever, if you have a very active activity. But what we have to do is we have to just keep going, keep asking that question again. So if we say, what happened? And you start getting those little, like, simple, like, off-the-wall answers, we just say, what else? What else? What else did we notice? What else happened, right? Just keep asking, and they're eventually going to understand that you are digging for something deeper than the shallow stuff they're giving you, right? So what else? That is a facilitator's best friend, is asking that question. So we do that, and then we move into, we find the little nugget that the kid gives us that moves us a little further down the train, or down the tracks, and we ask the question, so what? So what does whatever you just said mean for this activity? So what? Okay? So we're basically thinking of this like a funnel, and we're funneling it down to the point that we want to make. And then once we have that point, once they get it, once they understand what it is we're trying to talk about, and it doesn't mean that all kids get it, we just have to have one of them say it out loud. Okay? That's all that we have to do, is get one kid to say it out loud. Then we say, now what? So now that we know whatever the point is, what does that tell us about this larger picture? Like, what does it tell us about how we can apply this in life? Okay? So we just need a kid to say the point, and then we ask the now what, and that takes us right into our application piece, whatever that may be. So those are our 3 questions, and we're going to kind of lay that over the top of our experiential learning. So our concrete experience takes place. The kids have fun. They do the activity, whatever it is. And then in their reflective observation, that's us asking the question, what? Okay? And to me, experiential learning did not make sense until somebody did this for me. So that's why I wanted to include this, because maybe you haven't seen it either. But our reflective observation, that's our what. And then we get to our abstract conceptualization. That's our so what. That's where we make meaning of it. That's where we arrive at our point. And then finally, our now what. This is how do we take this and apply it, right? So to me, I thought that was huge the very first time I ever saw those overlaid. And I think that it's important to keep that in mind, because it kind of gives you a model for processing experiences. Any questions on that? Okay. I'm sorry. I know I'm going fast, and I'll slow down, and we can have some time to talk at the end if we get done, but there's a little bit more. Okay, so we actually have 4 types of processing, and this is outlined in a book called The Processing Pinnacle. Okay, if you're into this kind of stuff, Processing Pinnacle is a good book, because it kind of aligns Bloom's taxonomy with it. Talks about how do we get kids up into those higher order thinking. How do we do that? And the Processing Pinnacle helps us there. So we have 4 types. The first is going to be facilitator front loading. Then we have traditional Q&A, participant directed processing, and independent reflection. And this is indicated that facilitator front loading is going to be the simplest, easiest form of processing that we can do. And we're going to use all of these on any given day. Okay, so facilitator front loading means that we have this activity, and I'm going to tell the kids what they should expect from this activity before we ever get going. Okay, I'm going to say, you should notice this, you should see this happening, like those types of things. I'm going to plant those seeds so that in the end, whenever I ask my what, so what, now what, they're just giving me back everything that I've told them. Okay? Then we have our traditional Q&A, and that's kind of where we live as ag teachers, right? Is asking questions, get an answer. Ask questions, get an answer. There's nothing wrong with that. So a traditional question and answer is high facilitator involvement and high group involvement, because it requires interaction on both sides. Then we have participant-directed processing, and this is going to be where we allow the participants to create their own questions. Okay? So we have an experience, and you ask them to sit down and create 3 questions regarding what they just did. And then you allow them to facilitate themselves, basically. All you are is the person asking and moderating those questions. That one's a little bit more difficult, not something we typically see in an educational setting, because a lot of times it's hard to get students to think in that way, to be like critical of an activity and write that stuff down. And then finally, we have independent reflection, and this is like anytime that we say, hey, let's sit down and let's journal about this. let's sit down and let's think about this, and allow them to pull their own conclusions. The only time that I ever felt like independent reflection worked for me was like on an officer retreat. So if I ever put kids through a meaningful experience and then I gave them a half hour to like walk away from that and go sit and think about the things that we had just done. And that was really, really good, but that tends to be with your more motivated kids. And that's why I felt like my officers were a good place to try that. So we have 4 types of processing, and then you can see the matrix about group involvement, facilitator involvement. But we can utilize those in different settings. And that's key, I think, to creating experiences that are unique and not necessarily fall into a pattern every time. Any questions on that? Okay, so we're going to touch briefly on cooperative learning. And let me tell you that the cooperative learning, the outlook on cooperative learning that I used is by a guy named Kagan. Okay, and this book is excellent, and it is something that I go back to all the time. I mean, you can tell it's pretty worn out, but this book is a lifesaver in a lot of ways because it gave me like a set of structures that were free of content that I could utilize over and over and over with my kids. And so I'm going to just kind of hit on some of those things that I thought helped me. So the first thing was, what is cooperative learning? Well, cooperative learning is based on 4 tenets, and it's called PIES. Okay, so it's positive interdependence, individual accountability, equal participation, and simultaneous interaction. So whenever I told you that my kids sat in clusters, that's where this comes from. Because I had clusters of desks where I had 4 kids at each cluster. I didn't like the horseshoe. I hated the horseshoe because I just felt like it allowed those kids to kind of like hide behind their desk. And so I liked my clusters. And then I was able to have a supply box on every cluster. And it made a big difference for me. And so what we have to look at is this cluster is considered a team. And then all of the collective teams make up our classroom, right? And so we're going to have some activities where they work with their shoulder buddy, whoever's sitting next to them. We're going to have some activities where they work as their team. And then we're going to have some activities where we work as an entire class. And I structured all of my lessons around utilizing those clusters. And every single class that I had, we did something with our shoulder buddy, we did something as a team, and we did something as a class. Yes, ma'am?
Did you have assigned seats, or did you let them choose a team?
I assign seats. So whenever they first come in, I let them sit wherever they want to sit. Okay? Because that also lets me kind of figure out who the cliques are, and then I know to avoid that. But then from there, I assign seats. But just because they are assigned in that team doesn't mean that we can't work within other teams. And there's like some structures in this book that talk about that where we can mix and match. Like you tell everybody to put your hand up. It's called hand up, stand up, mix up, or something like that. They put their hand up, they stand up, they walk to someone that's not in their team, give them a high five, and that's their group member for that activity. So just things like that. But yeah, I absolutely assign those seats. And we're going to talk about it in just a second, so I'm getting ahead, but I appreciate you asking the question. I like heterogeneous groups. Okay, I don't like friends sitting next to each other. I don't like groups of all boys. I don't like groups of all girls. So I mixed them up as good as I possibly could with the information that I had. And then if it wasn't working, we did a little shuffle and we went to a different assignment.
What do you do if you have a really, really small class? Like, inevitably, even at the size of school I'm at now, I'm at a 5A school, I'll have a class with 1 or 3 or maybe 6 students.
Okay.
6 or less is hard for me. I'm not good at maintaining consistency and structure when I have less than 10, basically.
Yeah.
So what would you do for that?
Yeah, so if I have 6 or fewer, I just put them all into one team. And I do the same structure with those kids. And I had those kinds of classes as well. I mean, we had 510 kids in our ag program, but I would still have classes that only had 6 in it. Hopefully they don't do to you what they started doing to me was they would put like 4 preps in the same class period, and I would have like 4 here, 4 here, 4 here, 4 here. That's not much fun. But we can still cluster that. And whenever I had 4, 4, 4, 4, it was awesome because they were a team, they were a team, they were a team, they were a team. And I just rotated around the room teaching the things I needed to teach. But yeah, so I would skip the whole class and I would skip the shoulder buddy and I would just do team activities. That's a great question. Okay, so it's based on these tenets. So positive interdependence creates mutual support. It normalizes achievement and it increases our peer tutoring. And that was huge because anytime I can get a kid explaining something, it means they get it, right? Individual accountability increased student participation and motivation to learn. The equal participation was really key. Everybody has a role. Everybody does their role. And that creates engagement. And then finally, we have simultaneous interaction instead of it being like scaffolded or like, if we're doing linear or something like that. It makes sure that everybody's participating all at once. Okay, so some keys to this are structures, first and foremost. So structures are content-free, and they can be used throughout your class period. And whenever I say structures, how many of us have ever done a think, pair, share? That's a structure. How many of us have ever done like a round robin, like we have 4 things out and they go from place to place to place taking notes? That's a structure. How many of us have ever had a go get it wall where we've put stuff up on a sticky notes and they go grab it and take notes or do whatever? That's a structure. So these are all things that we've been doing forever. They just put a different label on it, right? And it's really again, I'm going to keep going back to this, but there's about 30 of those in here that can be applied to all levels of teaching and every single classroom that I've ever seen. Okay, now there's some of them that I don't like, and I'm not necessarily going to use those, but you find the ones that you do, and you do them well. And then the other thing this does is, if you get into a moment where you're like, oh shoot, like my lesson's not taking as long as it should, or whatever, or maybe this kid's not understanding it, and I'm getting some formative feedback that they're not getting it, I can put them through one of those structures to then kind of adapt and figure out where we need to go. So structures are huge. And then teams. So again, we talked about teams. There's 4 types of teams. We have heterogeneous, homogeneous, random, and student selected. So heterogeneous just means that we are mixing up gender, we are mixing up ability levels, we are mixing up ethnicities, we're mixing up language. Okay, and that's key. Okay, now if you have a kid that only speaks Spanish, you probably need to have somebody that speaks Spanish with them. So you have to be a little bit selective there. But what I'm getting at here is we learn so much better whenever the people around us are different from us than if they're the same. So they call that heterophilia and homophily. So if you've ever had Dr. Edwards' tech change class, he talks about that a lot, right? And we learn more in a heterophilia type situation. Same thing here, heterogeneous groups. Random, that's where we just draw out of a hat. Student selected, the kids get to pick their teams. And this is what I'm meaning. I like heterogeneous assigned seats for my constant teams. But there might be some activities where I allow the kids to choose their team. I would choose that if maybe an underperforming kid has an ability that would be desirable that other kids would want on their team. Then we might let them student select so that they go get that kid and make him feel good, right? Or her feel good. So those are things that I kind of keep in mind. So teams are key to cooperative learning. You can't have cooperative learning if you're sitting in a horseshoe. You can't have cooperative learning if they are at individual desks. So that's why I do clusters and they know who their team is. Okay, next up is management. So management, we talk about our room arrangement and seating. So again, we need cluster arrangement and assigned seating. Manage our materials, put them in a tub, and each group has a tub. Okay, and that makes that super quick and simple. Cleanup is super simple usually, as long as you're not cutting and pasting. And then giving directions, we talked about that. How do we give effective directions? And then finally, solving team problems. So we create norms that help us to avoid like inter-team problems. So maybe one kid doesn't like the other kid. We create norms. Well, we do that with our social contract, right? That social contract help us to establish those norms, how we're going to treat people. Then it's super important that at the very beginning of the year, we do class building activities, okay? We start with class building, we move to team building. And these are whole class interactions. They might be a scavenger hunt where you send kids around, they have to get a signature of somebody that has a dog, or somebody has 3 siblings, or somebody who's traveled out of the country, or whatever that may be. We do class building activities first, and then we move into team building activities where we do the same thing at our individual teams. And that's the next thing. So team building does what class building does for the class. And then finally, social skills are really important here, but social skills are only enhanced by cooperative learning, okay? Things like active listening, appreciation for others, asking for help. Like those things are all social skills that are enhanced and reinforced through cooperative learning, and i.e. those are life skills as well, right? So you're teaching like little mini lessons along with your content. So what does a cooperative classroom look like? Well, a traditional classroom might say that a good class is a quiet class. How many of us enjoy a quiet class? It's not a bad thing, right? I like it when my kids get quiet too. But whenever we teach a cooperative learning in a cooperative setting, we have to understand that learning is going to involve some healthy noise, right? Now, I'm not saying that it is just out of control, but it is going to involve chit-chat, right? Because kids are going to be talking, they're going to be interacting, there's going to be laughing. It's going to be fun, right? So we have to keep in mind that it's not just going to be a dead, silent classroom, okay? A traditional says, keep your eyes on your own paper, but a cooperative learning says, hey, help your partner solve that problem, okay? And I'm not saying do this on tests, but like it's really, like again, if you can get a kid explaining something, it means they get it. They understand it, right? I mean, that's like the highest part of Bloom's taxonomy, is getting that kid to be able to teach it or explain it. A traditional classroom might say sit quietly, but a cooperative classroom is going to say get up and look at what others have done. Okay? Like this is where we're going to have our carousel. We're going to move around. We're going to look at different examples. And that's a big thing as well. And then we might say that talking is cheating, but over here we're going to say verbalize to learn, right? Ask questions and you're going to get good answers. It doesn't matter if that answer is coming from me or someone else. Like, let's just ask good questions. So that's what a cooperative learning classroom looks like. So again, there can be an entire class taught on that, but you guys kind of got a crash course of the things that I felt were important in my classroom and made it a little bit easier. Any questions on that? Yes.
Sorry.
No problem.
So how do you handle, 'cause my 8th graders were worse about this, how do you handle when you put them in groups and they say, I don't want to be in a group with this person, and they just can't get along?
Yeah, so then we have a conversation of, well, in life, we're gonna have people that we can't get along with, right? But we're gonna learn how to deal with them now. And then we're gonna say, you know what, give them a chance. Have you ever spent any time with them? Let's give them a chance. You might really like this person, right? And that's the thing is, these team buildings, like close proximity is, like close physical proximity is ultra important. You have to have them in a cluster because it creates the opportunity for them to interact. The second thing is we still have our social contract and we have our norms. And I'm going to come back to that and say, okay, you say you don't like that person. Like, how does that fit into our social contract? Didn't you say that you would respect them? Didn't you say that you would not interrupt them? Didn't you say that you would cooperate with them? And kind of use that to kind of pull back. Now, if there's like major pushback, then you're probably, I would assume you need to rearrange your groups. But we want to do that where that conversation is private, not necessarily in front of everyone, because then they realize they can just throw a fit till they get to sit next to who they want to. That's a great question, though. Any other questions?
I've tried groups before. Realistically, how long can that group work together?
So
Are you committed to that for a semester or a year?
I tended to do mine for a 6-week grading period unless I had problems. But the kids knew that whenever the report cards came out, they were getting mixed up.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. Yes?
So mine is a little different where I have 2 schools. So
Mhm.
one gets buses in, so they're 10 minutes late and leaves 10 minutes early. So it's really hard to kind of put them into groups that aren't always the same because of the students that I have for the whole hour versus the 30 minutes that I have the other school.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of what would be something you would do in that?
So I would suggest like the kids from one school being in a set of teams and kids from another school being a set of teams, and then just mixing them up within the bus, like the busing group versus the non-busing group.
So you've done that, and then they get mad at each other on the bus, right? So they get mad, and then they're like, I'm not being in a group with this person. I see them all day. I want to be in a group with somebody else in a different high school.
Well, that's fair.
So
I mean, yeah, That's like the first thing that comes to mind to me. But the other side of that may be that maybe you do a hybrid where you only work in teams for the 30 minutes they're there, and the other 10 minutes you're working individually. That might be the best option. I've never had that situation, so.
I tried a bunch of things. I'm still
Yeah.
trying to figure it out.
Well, if you try something that works, like we'd all love to hear, I'm sure. Okay, so last little bit. I know we're almost running right up on time, so some tips and tricks. Okay, y'all heard me use music. I love music in my classroom. Some people don't. If you don't, that's fine. I love music in my classroom because it's a timing tool. Like before I said, let's talk for the duration of one song, and it helps me to time, and I'm not having to watch my phone or something for if I give them 3 minutes or if I give them 2 minutes, I'm not having to watch the countdown. I'm listening for the song, so that helps me. The other thing that it does is it increases the effectiveness of our state. It can put them into a reflective mood. It can kind of build up your mood. It can do all those things and impact their learning. And it can be a great reward for good behavior. Like if they behave well, I'll let them pick a song that we'll listen to as long as it's appropriate at the end of class. Or I might reward them with letting them be the DJ for the class period. Okay? But I have to make sure that they're not playing inappropriate songs.
I wanted to share that in my class, I also use that as a noise monitor. And so I'll tell them when I have music on, if I can't hear the music at any point in time, they're being too loud.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool thing to use as well, because they know, okay, if I can't hear and I'm sitting right next to the board, maybe our group needs to be quieter
Yeah.
or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great thought. I had never thought of something like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I had my officers create a playlist like ahead of time that we, was able to check and see. So like the music that we played in class was only from that playlist.
Yeah.
So we knew it was like good.
Yeah, and that's what I said, like check your playlist for profanity. Like we have to vet our playlists. Yes.
Just a suggestion, if you use Spotify or have a Spotify account, they have in your settings, you can set it to where there's no explicit content.
Yeah.
If we're going on a road trip or something like that, I'm the only one that controls the music, or my teaching partner, and if it's off of my phone, I just set it to not play the explicit content. Or the one that I have open on my computer is always set that way.
Yeah.
And you have to have a passcode to take it off of there. So even if you hand come to a student and say, hey, pick the next song,
They
and
can't.
watch them do it, then they can't even take that setting off without
Yeah.
knowing the passcode.
Well, and I like having the Bluetooth so I don't ever hand my phone to a kid.
Yeah.
Because they are the ones that it's off of their phone. But I do that sparingly, right? And only with kids I trust. And I tell them the minute I hear something bad, I said that privilege goes away and you're going to the office, right? Like or you're getting detention or I'm writing you up or whatever it is. So just be aware of that. But yeah, vet your playlist. If you need a good playlist, my Spotify is Ryan W. Best. And I have one called Ryan's Classroom Mix. Okay, and what it is it's all songs that I have listened for. But what I like about them is they're songs that in a reflective moment, they sound reflective. And in an active moment, they sound active. And so I don't have to go pick and choose songs, which is something I really, really like. Ryan W. Best on Spotify. And it's Ryan's Classroom playlist or mix or whatever it is. So you're welcome to go subscribe to that. I will say that some of my family members have access to my Spotify, so sometimes a song might get slipped in there on accident, but for the most part, I try to go filter them out. So that's first tip and trick. Second one is supplies and materials, like I've told you this, but beyond just having your bucket, also have tennis balls on hand or ping pong balls or Post-it notes or things that you can put together, a really quick learning activity, have those ready and available. And have a procedure for cleaning up a mess and doing those kinds of things. So that's that. I say tape and glue. I hate that. I hate crafts so much. So I hate that. But Jenga set, you would be so surprised at how useful a Jenga set can be. And I also had the giant Jenga blocks that I made out of 2x4s. And that was incredible because I used it as a test review technique. Split the groups into 2 teams. And they played, I asked them questions. If they got the question right, they picked someone off the other team to come pull a block. If they got the question wrong, they had to come pull a block. Whichever team made the tower fall, the other team got extra credit points. I mean, it was fun. The kids looked forward to it every time we had a test. So like just that kind of stuff is huge. And then the last one that I wanted to share, I mean, we've all had this moment where we're just like, God, like, get these kids out of here, right? But how do we handle misbehavior? How do we avoid looking like this? Well, for me, there are 4 questions. And again, I can't take credit for this because they're all in this Capturing Kids' Hearts. But 4 questions that I ask my kids, and it stymies everything. It stops all problems in their tracks pretty much. Usually whenever I do my social contract and I point to it, we're fine. But sometimes kids might continue on, and so then I just ask these 4 questions. I say, what are you doing? Okay, and you have to make them answer. You cannot let them just sit there. Nothing. No, what were you doing? Well, I was on my phone. What were you supposed to be doing? We're supposed to be taking notes. Are you doing that? No. So what are we going to do about it? I'm going to put my phone up and I'm going to take notes. You make them answer the questions. Okay? It also works on nieces and nephews. So I don't have kids, so I don't know whether it works on kids, but it works on nieces and nephews as well. Those 4 questions. I printed those 4 questions and they were at the top above my dry erase board. Okay? And they knew I was asking them those questions if they were doing something wrong. And they didn't want to be called out like that, so I had no problems. I think I sent 1 kid to the office ever, and it was just because it escalated way beyond something I could handle. So just, think about that. Like, just how do we avoid instances for kids to get in trouble? I think that's it for me. Do y'all have any questions, comments, concerns, or emotional outbursts regarding facilitation in the classroom?
Would you send us a list of books?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I've got up here, Processing Pinnacle, how do we process kids to a point? I've got the Trainer's Handbook. This is mostly for andragogy, so adult education, but there's some really good things in here for students as well. And this goes through everything from multicultural relations to direction sets to experiential learning. This is really good. I've also got Quantum Teaching. Quantum Teaching talks more about your modalities. So are they a kinesthetic learner? Are they an auditory visual learner? And like different ways that we can do that. This is a great book, a huge resource. Y'all have heard me learn about or talk about Kagan's. I would suggest this. This is written from an elementary school teacher perspective. Just make it mature. That's all I can say. It's super good. Capturing Kids' Hearts, this is expensive, but if you ever get the chance to go through it, or if your school district needs to spend some money and wants to put y'all through some really good PD, this is an excellent. This changes, in 1 year, this changed the way all of our teachers interacted with our kids. And we became a school district where kids wanted to be in the classroom because they realized their teachers cared about them, and it was because of this. So I can't say enough about this. These other 2 are simple, but they're just like NLCSO and Blast-Off curriculum from National FFA. They've got a lot of these resources on their website. But absolutely, if you would like me to send you my PowerPoint and a list of those, my email address is right there somewhere. There. It's just ryan.best@okstate.edu. Again, I hope that y'all took something away from this. I just wanted to share some things that I felt made my classroom teaching much more effective. And I hope that it was helpful for the things you have going forward. If you have any questions, comments, whatever, feel free to reach out. I'm very good at answering email. So.